We are in a series called Predetermined. We are in the third week of a series called Predetermined. And if you are newer with us or this is your first week here, I'm going to fill you in on the last 2 weeks. Predetermined is a determination you have already made, but it's before you have to make it. And you're caught up. There you go. That's it. You are up to speed with the rest of us if you are new here, a guest with us. And we're glad you're here. Would love to meet you after. And so that's what we're talking about, predetermining. What would happen if we could predetermine some of our decisions, but before we have to make them? Now, I want to start with kind of a question for you, for us. How many of you have been to a funeral? Anybody been to a funeral? I would say most of us have been to one, and if you've not been to one, you're at least familiar with what happens at a funeral. At a funeral, the loved one that's passed is presented to people, and nice things are said about them. Something nice is written in the paper, and it's approved by the family, and people can read about the deceased. They can read about the person that's passed. And then at the funeral itself, family members or somebody's going to get up, and they're going to say nice things about the person laying in the casket or in the urn. And then you're going to go to the graveside, and more nice things are going to be said. And then you're probably going to have some egg salad sandwiches at the reception, and more nice things are going to be said. Because that's what we do at funerals. We show up and we say kind words. Now, I want you to think about something that might be a little bit maybe morbid. If God were to show up at your funeral, and He were to say a few words about you, what would they be? That's a sobering question if you really think about it. If God were to show up, I'm laid out in my casket, and God shows up, and God grabs the microphone for Dan. Oh boy. Here's what I hope He doesn't say. I hope He doesn't show up to a funeral, pull out a piece of paper, put on his reading specs. Who's this? Oscar? Okay. Oscar, let me see. Oscar. He's a liar. He's a thief. Okay. Wow. He was an adulterer. Yep. He did that. Yep. He was a homewrecker. Wow. Okay. He was a murderer. Put that back in our pocket. He was a guy who let things go to his head. He was a guy who had a problem with lust. And in fact, his lust led him to sleep with another man, another woman, another person. Leveraged his influence to kill people. R.I.P. Oscar. It's interesting when you think about what God would show up and say at your funeral, it actually, at least for me, it causes me to just pause for a minute and arrest my thoughts and go, who am I really? It should cause you, just for a second, to pause and ask yourself, who am I really? Liar, thief, lust, adulterer, murderer, abused power as a king, leveraged his influence to kill a man. You know who that is? David. If you don't know who David is, you've probably heard of him as the guy that killed Goliath. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you're probably familiar with David, the little boy who slung his sling and stone and plucked a giant in the forehead and fell him and killed him. That's David. But before he was the king, and before he was the ruler of a nation, and before he even killed a giant, you know what he was called and labeled? A man after the heart of God. See, sometimes we think he accomplished those things to get that title. He didn't. It was before he was king. It was before he was an adulterer. It was before he was a liar. It was before he was a murderer. It was before he was a thief. It was before any type of accolade was given to him. God showed up and said, this guy, this boy, this kid is a man after my heart, is what he says. See, we think David accomplished, that David did and then got the title. No. He was labeled that before. He was chosen as that before his life fell off the rails. See, God knew he would do all of those stupid things kill, steal, murder, adulterate. He knew he would do all of those things and still said, I love this kid. He is a man after my own heart. You know what that does? That brings you and I hope. That he knew you would mess up. He knew you would falter. He knew you would fail. He knew you would slide. He knew you would slip up. And he still said, yeah, but I want them and I love them. That should bring us hope this morning. That in spite of our past, in spite of our circumstances, in spite of the decisions that we make that don't honor him, he still loves us. If God were to show up at your funeral and say a few words about you, what would he say? He loves you. In fact, he would show up and say, man, I didn't want this guy or this girl in heaven without me. I wanted them there with me. I gave my son for them. That's what he would say. What I love about this concept, a man after my own heart, a woman after my own heart, is the heart is the core of who you are. I want you to think about that. Your heart is the core. Like, without your heart, you don't live, right? It pumps blood. It circulates blood and oxygen to your body. Without the heart, you don't exist. And yet the heart spiritually is the core of who we are. It drives our emotions. It drives our desires. It drives our behaviors and our purposes. It drives our actions and our passions. The heart is the core of who we are, which is why Jesus said in the New Testament, listen, out of your heart, from within your heart, this is the reality. It's where your evil thoughts come from. It's where sexual immorality comes from. It's where theft comes from. It's where murder and adultery and greed and wickedness and deceit and lustful desires and envy and slander and pride and foolishness, all of this, it comes from here. Which then leads me to the next question. Who controls your heart? Who or what controls your heart? In fact, Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else because it determines the direction, the course of your life. So what if we could actually predetermine who gets our heart? What if we could pre-choose that God, no matter what, you control my heart. Even if that decision dishonors my boss, I will not dishonor you, God. You have my heart. Because from your heart flows your life. Who controls your heart? If you have your Bibles, I'd love for you to flip open to 1 Samuel chapter 16. You can grab a Bible in front of you. If you don't have a Bible, take that. Let it be your Bible. Take it home. Read it. Get into it. In 1 Samuel 16 is where we're going to look. But what we have to understand before we get to 1 Samuel 16, in 13, 14, and 15, the Israelites are on a quest to become like other people, other nations. You see, the Israelites, God's people, God's countrymen and women, have always had God as their king. God has always been their ruler. God has always been their leader. He's their king. And then at one point, the Israelites look around to the other nations and go, but they have men leading them. We want what they have. And Samuel, where we're going to look at in a second, is like, I don't think that's a good idea. And they're like, but we want a man to lead us. And all the women are like, that's not a good idea. You don't want a man leading. And so Samuel's like, are you sure? And they're like, give us a man. And so Samuel says to God, are you sure? And God's like, this is what they want. They want me to step out. I'm going to give them what they want. Because God is not a dictator. God doesn't tell you what to do. God can't control you. You have to surrender control. And so God says, okay, you guys want a king? You guys can have Saul. And so Saul becomes the king of Israel. And things are actually going pretty well until, as my grandma said, he becomes a little too big for his britches. It's an old school, I don't even know what that means. It's just too big for his britches. And so all of a sudden now, God's like, we need to assign a new king. That's what we have to do. It's time to appoint a different leader for the nation. And so he taps Samuel on the shoulder. He's like, I need you to go to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse. One of his sons is there. And it's the future king. He's the future king. He's a man after my own heart. That's where God labels David a man after his heart. is for Samuel to go to the house of David, the house of Jesse in Bethlehem, and say, I need you to get that guy. But here's what's interesting is you would think with God in his sovereignty would say, I need you to go to the house of Jesse. He's got a son, and his name is David, and that's the kid I want. But he doesn't tell Samuel who he's picking. That's part of obedience, friends, is you don't get all the answers before you say yes to Jesus. We have to wrestle this down. In our information age and our desire to control, we think we need to have all the answers from God about everything before we say yes to him. And Samuel is like, okay, I'm going to go, and it's a man after your own heart. Okay, I can get down with that. All right, so here's what happens. 1 Samuel 16. He's on his way. He did what the Lord said. He arrived at Bethlehem, and the elders of the town of Bethlehem trembled when they met him because he's the prophet. And they said, do you come in peace? Verse 5, Samuel replied, yep, I'm here in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord, so go prepare yourselves and then come to the sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Because remember, he's been told, one of your sons is man after my own heart. So they arrived at the sacrifice. Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands before me. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab in and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. So Abinadab, off to the side. You got to go over there. You're not picked first. Eliab, you're over there. You're not picked. You're gone. Jesse then had Shammah pass by. Go stand in line with your brothers. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to each one of them, no, you are not the Lord's chosen. Now remember what God has said. Go to this house, go to the house of Jesse in the town of Bethlehem, and I want you to pick one of the sons. He's a man after God's own heart. But God said to these 7, it's not them, it's not them. So Samuel's wrestling, Samuel's questioning, what is happening? So he says to the dad, he says to Jesse, are these all the boys you have? Like, are these all the sons you have? Are these all the men you have? And this is how the dad answered. Verse 11, they're still the youngest, but he doesn't matter. They're still the youngest, but he's out tending the sheep. They're still the youngest, but he has no significance in this moment. They're still the youngest. Samuel said, well, send for him, and we will not sit down until he arrives. And so they sent for David. He's out in the field. He's playing hopscotch. He's doing his thing, slaying dragons. They had him brought in. He was ruddy with a fine appearance, handsome features. And then the Lord said to Samuel, and Samuel responded, and this is what the Lord said, rise and anoint him. That's the one. That's the guy. And Samuel's like, it's a kid. This isn't a man. This is a kid. And the brothers are standing on the sideline going, what? He's a kid. He has no value. He's out doing the menial work that we didn't want to do. As the big brother, that's your right, to make the little brothers go and do the stuff that you don't want to do. It's a privilege. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him, listen, in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, hear me, this is the crux of this passage. From that day on, from that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. And yet, listen, he still slept with another man's wife. He still murdered her husband. He still lied and stole and cheated. And it says the Spirit was upon him. I need someone here to hear this morning very carefully. Just because you've messed up doesn't mean God has forsaken you. We think if we fall, if we slide, if we mess up, that all of a sudden we've got to start back at ground zero and start over again. David had the Spirit come upon him as a little kid, still messed up, and had the power upon him. And I want you to picture this. David isn't even invited to the selection process. So The servants go out. You got to imagine this. The servants go out. David, you're needed at home. Well, and automatically it's probably bad news. Did somebody fall? Did somebody get hurt? What happened? Who's dead? And David walks in stinking to high heavens. He's not showered up and cleaned up. He walks in and his brothers are standing there and he's like, what do I do now? Awkward silence. Like, what's going on? Why am I here? I don't belong in this room. David was underqualified. He wasn't even invited. The dad didn't even see value in him. And he walks in and he's just like, I don't know what's happening right now. This is weird. This is uncomfortable. And now he's the next king, anointed in front of his brothers, unqualified. I just want to ask you a very simple question. How many of you ever have felt unqualified in life? As a parent? Parents, we're raising humans. I feel unqualified sometimes to be a parent. How about work? I'll use my work as an example. I sometimes feel unqualified to be a pastor. The pressures to please 200 plus people, because you all have your opinions and you all have your preferences for me and on me, and I'm like, holy smokes, God, are you sure I'm supposed to be doing this? This is hard. There are times where I feel unqualified to stand up here, open the Word of God, and proclaim it. There are probably times where you have felt unqualified in life. This is a moment where David, standing in front of his brothers who should have been picked before him, standing in front of the prophet and in front of his dad, goes, I don't know if I'm qualified for this moment. And yet he was a man after God's heart. And listen, if the heart is the core of who we are, the heart of God is the core of who he is. Are you after the core of who God is? Are you after the core of what he values? See, God doesn't judge us the way that we judge us. God doesn't judge others the way that you judge others. God values the heart. Above everything else, he values the heart. I just want to tell you something. You know what we do? We value some weird things as humans. Like a piece of paper with a picture on it. You want to break it down? We value some dumb things. A LeBron James rookie card, which is a piece of paper with a picture on it. $5.2 million. A piece of cloth with a number and a name on it. $10.1 million. We just value weird things. An old person. An old picture. $12 million for a piece of paper with a name on it. How about this one? This one's interesting. The Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci. $450 million, and he's just giving deuces. So, like, we value the weirdest things. Now you're thinking, well, those things have value. Those things are important. Okay, how about a pin? Thank you, Brett. A pin, a Disney pin. Bink, pin. Clip it on. 11 grand. Pez dispensers. Okay, we're going to go somewhere with this. This is insane. The Munster lunchbox set, 16 grand. $9.99 at the Walmart, okay? We just value these weird things. Disney on a Snow White 7 doors memorabilia, $110,000. The original Barbie doll sold for $302,000. Get this one, a piece of paper with a picture on it, the original Jaws poster, just shy of $700,000. We value dumb things. We just do. I got a couple more. The Birkin bag. Ladies, $2 million for a satchel? What have we, like, what do we value? This is the weirdest. Okay, the original Batman, don't yell at me. $3.2 million. Stupid. It's pictures on paper. And they added words to it this time for $3.2 million. I got a couple more. The first stamp from Great Britain, $9.4 million. Here's your last one. This one is going to blow your mind. Because we've shifted from paper with pictures to what's called NFTs. You're like, what's an NFT? I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a non-fungible token. It sounds like a disease, okay? It's really weird. It's a non-fungible token. You're like, what does that mean? It's a picture, but you can't touch it. It's digital. And it's $70 million. Like, we don't even have pictures on paper anymore. We just have digital. We value the dumbest things, the craziest things. And I'm going to just say it this, we often value the wrong things. I'm guilty of it. I value the wrong things sometimes. I'm not immune from that. But God values the heart. We value the wrong things sometimes. We value appearance. I want you to hear these stats. Last year in America, the average woman spent $4,000 on makeup, just on makeup. The average American man, woman spends $2,000 a year on clothing, $1,700 on footwear, $1,000 a year on a gym membership that doesn't get used. We buy lotions, don't judge me, I don't use it. We buy lotions and ointments and shampoos and conditioners, and hygiene's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're valuing appearance and status. Do you value the heart? If the heart is the core of who you are, the heart is the core of who God is, do you value the heart of God like you value your shoes? And you value your kids? How well do you value God? We value appearance. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was talking, one of my closest friends is a coach at a professional hockey level. He coaches in the AHL. We're having a conversation, and he is paid, and paid well, to judge appearance. How well do they skate? How well do they pass? How well do they shoot? We're having a conversation 2 to 3 years ago. He said, Dan, I get paid to judge people, but our locker room is a mess. And here's what I said to him, and I'll say it to you. You can teach competency, but you can't teach character. I said, Nick, you can teach them how to pass better and skate better and edge better and back check. You can teach all that, but you can't teach character. And because character matters more than competency, what happens is the chemistry in your locker room is becoming unraveled and undone. Sometimes your home is becoming undone because the character, you can't teach it. Sometimes relationships become undone because you can't teach character. That's between you and God. You can't teach me how to have better character. I have to want it and go after it myself. See, competency, you can teach it. Appearance, you can learn it. Character is a heart issue. God does not value appearance like we value appearance. You know what else Jesse valued that God didn't? Age. I'm going to press in here for a minute. I'm going to press in hard for a minute. Jesse brought out the oldest son, probably early 20s, maybe late teens, but probably early 20s, and thought this guy has to be the next king. Eliab's him. This is the guy. And Samuel said, God doesn't want him. And he goes through the list and he picks the youngest kid. Now, I want you to understand something. Age means nothing to the Lord. As a youth pastor for 8 years, conversations with so many kids, so many teenagers. I can't wait till I grow up so I can have a purpose. No, you don't need to grow up to have a purpose. You can have a purpose at 7. You can have a purpose at 8. I want you to think about this. Jehoash was an Israelite king for 40 years. He stopped reigning at the age of 47. You good at math? He was 7 when he became king. Listen, can you imagine the conversation? The servants come in, 7-year-old king. Hey, we're having a feast and a celebration. What would you like? We've got a great spread. We've got maybe some braised lamb, or we've got some pot roast. He's like, can we get some sour gummies and some Gushers? Like, a 7-year-old should never be put in charge of a kingdom. I have a 7-year-old. He should never be put in charge of a kingdom. Because God doesn't value age like we value age. Josiah was 8 years old and reigned Israel for 31 years. I'm going to flip it now, and I'm going to talk to the seasoned people in our church. who think because I'm 60, because I'm 70, because I'm 80, because I'm 90, I have no value and I have no purpose. Shut up. That is a lie Satan has told you. Respectfully, as your junior telling my senior to shut up. I say that, it's in the King James somewhere. Listen, there are people in our church who have retired and who sit on the sidelines and think, I don't have a purpose. I don't have value. I'm 70, I'm 80, I'm 91. What can I do? More than you even realize. And the enemy has taught you and told you you have no value and no purpose because you're old. God does not value age like humans do. You have more to offer if you're over 60 than I do. Let me say that again so you catch it. You have wisdom and insight and experience. You have value and purpose more than I do. Oh, I get the microphone, so you get to think, well, Dan's in charge. Dan feels unqualified sometimes. Dan would love to have a 70-year-old go, hey, what if we did this? I'm going to brag on a guy. He's not here this morning, so I can do this, and he won't yell at me. Dave King. Dave King came to me a year ago. He's seasoned in life. He came to me a year ago, and he said, I don't know what my purpose is, Dan. I don't know what my value is here. I said, well, what do you like to do? He's like, I love to teach. I love to study the Bible and teach others how to study and how to learn and how to grow in it. I said, Dave, let's start a small group. Dave started a small group. 7 or 8 people have been coming for a year, learning and growing together, learning and growing with each other, but learning and growing in the heart of God. If I would have been like, Dave, you don't have value, you don't have purpose, 7 or 8 people consistently would be missing out on the heart of God. You have value. Oh, we think, I'm old, I don't have value. We value as humans the wrong thing. You have more value and more insight and more wisdom and more experience and more knowledge and more help for our church than you could even imagine. Abraham was 100 years old when he had Isaac, served God faithfully till 175. You have value. Joseph lived to be 110 and rescued God's people. You have valued. Joshua, 110. How about Daniel, well into his 90s, who served at the behalf of 6 different kings over him faithfully? God does not value age like Jesse did. Jesse brought in all the oldest sons, in fact, left the youngest one out. And God didn't, and God doesn't value age like we do. You have to wrestle that down with God. But I'm telling you, he just doesn't. End scene, move on. I had to press into that. Because God is solely focused on and concerned with your heart. Not your Nikes, not your designer Birkin bag, which, by the way, if you have a Birkin bag, can you sell it? And tithe. God is solely focused on and concerned with your heart. He doesn't care about your status. He doesn't care about your appearance. He doesn't care about your age. He cares about the heart. And he cares about the posture and the position of your heart. I want to pose it this way, and then we'll turn the corner to wind down. I'm going to pose it this way. How many of you ever bought or sold a home? Anybody ever bought a home or sold a home? Most of us probably have bought or sold a home or been aware of the process. You have to go to the bank. You have to apply for a loan unless you're Birkin bagging it, then you can probably pay cash. But you guys are the anomalies. We'll keep you to the side with Eliab. And you go to the bank and you get your loan. You pick out your house. I want you to picture this. You've picked out the dream house you want. This is beautiful. A couple acres, little creek running through. I say creek, but you guys say crick, so I'm trying to adapt. Crick is something that happens when your neck hurts. A creek is what. Anyway, there's a creek running through the yard. It's beautiful. I can't wait to do this. You get to the table. It's closing day. And you're signing the papers, and the sellers are signing the papers, and the banker's signing the papers, and the deed person's signing the papers. Oh, that's great. And the sellers take their front door keys and they slide them across the table to you. And they take their back door keys and they slide them across the table to you. Then they take their garage door openers and they slide them across the table to you. And then they take that 3-season room sliding door, which what sold you on the house, and they slide it across to you, and you just gather it all up and sign it, and away you go. And you spend that first night in that home. This is a perfect home. Stay with me. You walk downstairs, turn the corner, and sitting at your kitchen table is the previous owner. And you're like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, this is my spot. I have my morning coffee here every morning. Look at the view with the creek. Look, I can't not have this. And you're like, but I bought this from you. Very often, that is us with God. We will give him, and we will give him this, but we have to hold on to this because it's ours. Jesus didn't die on a cross for you just to have the front door key and the back door key and the garage door openers, but not have the sliding door key. He didn't die for some of your hurts, of your pains, of your stresses, of your shame. He didn't die for some of it. He died for all of it. And oftentimes, we value the wrong things, and we don't fully surrender over all of us, all of our heart. Here's, in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 13, Paul is at the synagogue. He's teaching the leaders. He's teaching the people. He's preaching from what's called the writings of Moses. He finishes up. The leaders of the synagogue, the religious leaders, tell Paul, hey, would you teach us something else? Would you share one more thing with us? In Acts 13:22, this is what Paul chose to share with the people who would understand the concept and the construct of David being picked as king. This is what he said in Acts chapter 13. I got to remember where he's standing, in the synagogue in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. God removed Saul and replaced him with David, a man about whom God said, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, because he will do everything I want him to do. David was picked. Yep, he was going to be a murderer. Yep, he was going to be a liar. Yep, he was going to be an adulterer. Yep, he was going to be a train wreck. Because he was willing to do everything God wanted him to do. If God were to show up at your funeral and be given a microphone, would he be able to say this? Dan was after my heart. Dan was willing to do everything I wanted him to do. Carolyn was after my heart. Carolyn was willing to do everything I wanted her to do. Ava was after my heart. Eli was after my heart. Joan was after my heart. Barry was after my heart. Justin was after my heart. If he showed up at your funeral, would he be able to say this about you? It's a sobering question. David was after the heart of God because every time he failed, he repented. Every time he messed up, he turned back and resurrendered. You don't believe me? Read the Psalms. It's David constantly saying, what did I just do? God, I need you. How could I do that? God, would you help me? God, where are you? I've abandoned you. You've not left me. I've left you. Would you help me to find you again? That's all through the Psalms because David is an idiot. He was. He's our hero in the Bible, but he was an idiot. And I love him. Because he was willing to do everything God wanted him to do. Every time he sinned, he turned back. We talked about this a few weeks ago. There was the Judas and the Peter. Judas messed up but was unwilling to repent. Took his life and ended it. Peter did the same thing, sold out Jesus and said, I messed up, and turned towards. You see, we sang a song in our worship set called I Surrender All. We need to predetermine to keep surrendering everything to Jesus every day. Every day, every moment. All right, I need you to stay with me for three more minutes. I really try to honor your time and honor the clock and honor our children's workers downstairs as they lead 40 kids. I don't try to go over very much, but I need you to stay with me for 3 minutes and we'll be done. So you're sitting at that table, and the buyer's there, the seller's there, the banker's there, and the deed person is going to sign the title, all that stuff. They're all there, and you're buying the house. And the banker says the agreed upon price is $250,000. That's the average price in America right now. And you're like, oh, that's a lot of money. They say, how are you paying? And you're like, cash. Sellers are like, all right. And you reach into your Birkin bag and you pull out a big old stack of pennies. And you're like, my mama and my grandma always told me to save your pennies. And you got 2.5 million pennies in your bag. And you're like, 1, 2, 3, and then you're like, all right. And then you start passing to the banker. All right, there's 1 penny. And 2 pennies. 3, 4, 5 pennies. Could you just picture that? You're selling your house and they show up with 2.5 million pennies. And you're thinking to yourself, what in the world is happening right now? What are you doing? And your wife is looking at you like, what is happening? Your husband's like, what's going on right now? And the buyers are like, this is what I'm doing. You know how much time that would take? 1, 2. I need to say this. Some of us take this mentality into our relationship with Jesus. Oh, you can have that, but I got to go slow to give you everything. And Jesus is like, but I paid it all. I bought it all. I want it all. I want you to give me everything. That bitterness that you're holding on to from 1984, I want that. That abandonment that you suffered in 1991 when they walked out on you and left you, I want that. I want you to surrender that to me. That betrayal by your business partner, it's been that chip on your shoulder to drive you in business. God's like, I want that too. I want that. I want you to give me that. Imagine counting out 2.5 million pennies. You know how much you would miss out on? How long that would take? And I just wonder if God's got more for you than you even realized or imagined, and because you're not surrendering everything, you're missing out on God's more for you. You're missing out on the more from God. So if God were to show up at your funeral and he were to say a few words about you, what would he say? So I'm going to pray for us. I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to close our time and we're going to pray. But I want you to think about that question as we turn towards the end of our time together. I just want you to think about that thought. And it doesn't matter your age, because if you're a teenager, you're like, oh, I've got the rest of my life to live. Well, actually, technically, you don't know your day or hour. You don't know. And if God were to show up at your funeral tomorrow, what would he say about you?